Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Cassie Collins, and I'm here with Lieutenant Ada Willis, Lieutenant Mac Jameson, and Captain Pedro Caballero. Our study, Military CSR in the Eye of the Beholder, examines civilian public perception of the military, specifically looking at millennials and Generation Z, to determine the perceived legitimacy of military action among the next generation of American taxpayers. So what inspired our topic? According to Pew Research Center, younger generations of Americans are reportedly more socially conscious, but they're less impressed with the military than previous generations. This passive view of the military could have implications for future military funding, domestic support of military action, and overall service member recruitment. So we looked at Signature and Coombs 1992, and we saw that they stated that national power, that public diplomacy is a key instrument of national power, and it's one that's exercised by the military. So looking at that and recognizing that, we wanted to examine it further. And in examining this further, we looked at NIE 2008's bidimensional concepts of national power, hard power, and soft power, examining corporate social responsibility as it relates to soft power and corporate ability as it relates to hard power. Drawing inspiration from Tao and Wilson's 2016 study on corporate communication, we looked at corporate social responsibility, corporate ability, and a hybrid of these contexts, and placed it within the framework of public perception of military action.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Captain Pedro Caballero, and taking these concepts into consideration, we developed 3 research questions that serve as the basis for each part of our study. In part 1, we operationalized NIE's definition of power in foreign policy, hard and soft power, and then we connected those to corporate association terminology. So corporate social responsibility and then corporate ability. And then with that, we created a focal concept of military associations, military ability and military social responsibility. In part 2, we validated these operationalized concepts. And we also asked, how does this connect to PR? How does this connect to military public affairs? So we introduced visual imagery stimuli, and these stimuli were reflective of hard and soft power missions in the military. So HADR, territorial support, staff planning, and then ballistic missile defense. And then we sought to understand, how does this affect the public's perception of the military? And then for part 3, we worked upon that predictive power. And then we utilized the visual imagery from part 2, and then we added a textual emphasis on top of that. And we used social media as a mock vehicle, specifically Twitter, and we mixed the visual and the textual, and then we asked again, how does this affect the public's perception of the military?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Mac Jameson. So from here on out, we're going to be talking about methodology and findings from our studies. And so for the first part, we had looked at corporate social responsibility and corporate ability, and we created the focal concept of military social responsibility and military ability, but we had to test and see if those actually fit. And so what we did with that is we created 2 statements based on NIE's definitions of hard and soft power. So we created 2 statements, then we presented those to our subjects, and then we had them fill out a scale for corporate social responsibility and a scale for corporate ability. Then we looked at the measures of those, and what we found was that military, they did perceive military ability as ability. They perceived corporate social responsibility as soft power. They were able to tell the difference between those. So from there, we were able to then take that into our second stage of our study. And so for that study, we wanted to see where the boundary was between military social responsibility and military ability. And so we chose to do that with mission visuals. And to do that, we presented 4 separate images: territorial support image, a HADR image, a staff support image, and then a ballistic missile defense image. And what we found from that is that the ballistic missile defense was clearly military ability. People were able to tell that from the imagery. For the other 3, it was much more on a continuum between military ability and military and social responsibility. And so for us, that was interesting, and an area for future research to look into is what is going into that continuum. How are they really perceiving those? But that was a good starting place, and it led into our part 3 of our study.
So for part 3, we looked at Tao and Wilson 2016, and they used a hybrid approach to test this experiment. So we divided our subjects into a few experimental groups. Everyone viewed the same Twitter from the US Navy of the same humanitarian assistance disaster response image from part 2. So they were familiar with it and they knew that it was an HADR mission. The control group saw no accompanying text, so it was just a tweet of the image. We then had one experimental group that saw a military ability leaning text, so it was still describing the same thing that was happening in the photo, just with a corporate ability lean. We did one for military social responsibility, and then we did 2 cells that were a hybrid that had both a military ability sentence and a military social responsibility sentence. After doing a manipulation check, one of the hybrid cells was not able to self-identify, so we scrapped it, and thankfully we still had the second hybrid experimental cell. So what we found through analyses of variance is that if there is no text accompanying the image, the overall trustworthiness of the military decreased. So if there was any text, there was better trustworthiness versus pre and post, and no text, the trustworthiness significantly decreased. The second was that for any text that had corporate social responsibility language, the overall perception of corporate social responsibility as being values driven by the military significantly increased, which basically means people thought that we were doing it genuinely and not for some additional bonus. So what does this all mean? It means that public affairs officers in the military matter. Anyone can post a photo to Twitter of an HADR mission. But what we do is we contextualize that mission and we tell the audience what is important and why. And that's really powerful because we have UPARs, we have people that are collateral duty PAOs, and yes, they can also post a photo to social media, but we know what it means. And we know how to develop that relationship with that millennial and Gen Z audience that values social consciousness. They value that we have genuine values behind what we're doing. So we would challenge future researchers to look at that continuum between military ability and military social responsibility. As PAOs, we're really good about highlighting military ability, about what we do and kinetically bring to the fight. But this shows that military social responsibility is also important. And we need to focus on that verbiage and that language just as much as we're focusing on military ability language when it comes to these MSR-based missions. So thank you for coming to our presentation. We'll open it up for any questions.